Two 34-year-olds in two different apartments on the same Tuesday night in Atlanta are lying awake at 3:14 in the morning staring at their ceilings. The first one is Naomi. She is mentally listing every possible disaster that could happen tomorrow that her bank account could not survive. Her car could break down, her laptop could die, she could lose her job. The second one is Damon. He is doing exactly the same thing in his own apartment, 3 miles away. They do not know each other yet. They both work at the same company. They both earn the same modest salary. They both have approximately $700 in their checking accounts and $0 in savings. They are both lying awake at the same time, in the same city, running the same mental loop. This is the loop millions of Americans run every single night, and it has a specific cost. It is destroying their sleep, their relationships, their decision-making, and their futures. There is one specific dollar amount that ends this loop. It is not $1 million, it is not 100,000. The amount that fundamentally changes a person's psychological relationship with money, that ends the 3 a.m. ceiling stare, is $10,000. Today's story is about why that specific number rewires a human brain, and how two people in this city eventually crossed that threshold and discovered that everything they thought money was for was wrong. Here is what the world looks like when you have no money in the bank. You go to the grocery store on a Sunday afternoon, and you are not thinking about what you want to eat. You are thinking about what you can afford to eat. Generic cereal versus name brand cereal becomes a real internal debate. The math runs constantly in the background. If I get the name brand, that is $2.40 I do not have for the rest of the week. Your friends suggest going out to dinner on Thursday, and you come up with a creative excuse, because admitting that a $25 meal would derail your entire week's budget feels worse than lying. Every single financial decision is defensive. Every unexpected expense feels like an existential threat. The check engine light comes on in your car, and you do not feel annoyance. You feel a flash of pure adrenaline panic, because you know you do not have the money to fix whatever is wrong, and you do not have the money to not fix it either. This is the loop. And the loop is not a moral failing. The loop is a mathematical condition. You are running a household with insufficient capital reserves, and your brain has correctly identified that every decision you make has the potential to break you. Your stress response is rational. The system around you is the problem. So why $10,000? Why not 5? Why not 15? The number is not arbitrary, and it is not chosen because it sounds clean. It is chosen because of a specific intersection of mathematics and human neuroscience. On the mathematical side, $10,000 covers the vast majority of unexpected expenses that derail people financially in the United States. Most car repairs come in under $5,000. Most medical emergencies for insured people come in under $3,000 out of pocket. Most short job loss periods can be bridged for 3 to 6 months on $10,000 if you cut back. Whatever the specific disaster is, $10,000 in a savings account makes you functionally immune to most of the things that statistically destroy household finances. You are not invincible. You are, however, no longer one bad month away from collapse. On the neuroscience side, a fascinating thing happens to the human brain when it sees a 5-figure number in a savings account for the first time. Neuroscientists studying financial stress have documented measurable drops in cortisol levels, the body's primary stress hormone, when subjects move from 4-figure to 5-figure savings balances. The drop is not just psychological self-report. It is measurable in blood. The same person with the same bills, the same job, the same problems has biologically lower stress when one specific number in their bank account changes by 1 digit. Your body knows the difference between a 4-figure cushion and a 5-figure cushion. Your sleep knows. Your relationships know. Now, here is the part that almost no personal finance video gets right. The emergency fund is not actually about emergencies. Almost nobody who builds up a $10,000 savings account ends up spending it on emergencies. They spend it on opportunities. Once that buffer exists, a particular psychological shift happens that is hard to describe until you have lived through it. The fear of catastrophe stops dominating your thinking, and in the space that opens up, something else moves in. You start noticing things you could not see before. You see the certification course at work that would qualify you for a higher paid position. Before the buffer, the $1,300 tuition felt impossible. After the buffer, the $1,300 tuition feels like an investment. You see the apartment in a slightly better neighborhood whose deposit you can finally afford. You see the side business you have been thinking about for 3 years, and you realize you can finally pay for the equipment. None of this is reckless spending. It is the opposite. It is finally being able to play offense instead of constantly playing defense. The emergency fund's actual job is not to absorb emergencies. The emergency fund's job is to free your mind to recognize opportunities. The emergencies are the cover story. The opportunities are the real product. There is a confidence factor here that is impossible to measure, but obvious from the outside. People who have $10,000 in savings walk into rooms differently. They sit in chairs differently. They ask for raises differently. When you are desperate for a job, the interviewer can smell it through the screen on a video call. Your body language shifts in subtle ways. You laugh too quickly at their jokes. You agree too readily to their conditions. You accept the first salary offer because you cannot afford to push back. When you have $10,000 in savings, the same interview is a different event. You can let small, uncomfortable silences sit. You can ask hard questions about the company's culture without flinching. You can name a salary number that scares you a little, because if they say no, you have 3 months to find something better. You are not desperate. They can feel that you are not desperate, and the offer they make you is, on average, several $1,000s higher per year because of it. The same effect plays out across every other negotiation in your life. The car salesman at the dealership negotiates differently with the buyer who can walk away. The landlord negotiates differently with the tenant who can find another apartment. The contractor, quoting a job, negotiates differently with the homeowner who is not under time pressure. $10,000 in a savings account is, in a real measurable sense, several $1,000s per year of extra earning power across every negotiation you enter for the rest of your working life. Here is what most people get wrong about saving. They treat it like a diet. They cut their expenses dramatically for 3 months. They feel deprived. They white-knuckle it through 6 weeks of brown bag lunches. And then they break. They have a hard week at work. They justify a single splurge, and the entire saving project collapses. They go back to where they were before, plus a small extra amount of shame on top. Naomi and Damon did not save $10,000 by going on a savings diet. They saved $10,000 by quietly becoming different people. The shift is not a calculation. The shift is identity. At some point in the second month of their respective journeys, both of them stopped seeing themselves as people who were trying to save money. They started seeing themselves as people who save money. The distinction is small. The consequence is enormous. A person who is trying to save money is in a constant battle with themselves. A person who saves money has already settled the question. The first one is depleting willpower with every decision. The second one is following a rule they have internalized as part of who they are. Identity is much more durable than willpower. This is why almost everyone who reaches their first $10,000 goes on to save their second $10,000 faster than the first. The hard part was not the math. The hard part was becoming a different person. Once the identity is in place, the math handles itself. The financial benefits of saving the first $10,000 are real, and they are measurable. The benefits that nobody talks about, however, are the non-financial ones, and those are arguably larger. Start with sleep. The 3 a.m. ceiling stare we open this video on does not just affect your bank account. It affects your sleep architecture. People with chronic financial anxiety sleep an average of 43 fewer minutes per night than people with adequate financial buffers. 43 minutes a night, every night, compounded across a year, is the equivalent of losing 11 full nights of sleep annually. Sleep loss at that scale has measurable effects on cognitive performance, immune function, weight regulation, and yes, productivity at work. The person sleeping better is also, on average, earning more. Not because sleep magically raises salaries, but because well-rested cognitive performance compounds across every meeting, every decision, every project. Relationships are the second one. Money stress is consistently cited as one of the leading causes of divorce in the United States. The fights are not really about the money. They are about the chronic low-grade tension that infiltrates every interaction when a couple has no buffer. The person without $10,000 in savings is often, without realizing it, a worse partner, a worse parent, and a worse friend, not because they are a worse person, but because chronic stress depletes the emotional bandwidth that intimacy requires. The buffer does not just buy security. The buffer buys back the version of you that can show up for the people you love. Now, let us talk about how. Because most personal finance content describes the destination without telling you the route. And the route is the actual interesting part. Naomi and Damon both started in the same financial position 14 months ago. Damon set up an automatic transfer of $75 per paycheck, about $150 a month, from his checking account to a high-yield savings account at an online-only bank earning 4.25%. The transfer happened on the first of every month, before he had a chance to see the money or want it. Naomi did the same with $210 per month. Neither of them changed their jobs. Neither of them won a windfall. Neither of them moved in with parents. They simply redirected a portion of money they were already earning before they could redirect it elsewhere into an account that quietly grew. Damon's $150 monthly transfer is, across a year, $1,810 monthly transfer is, across a year, $2,520. Neither of those numbers is impressive on its own, but the redirected amounts came from places they would not have missed if they had been honest about their spending. Damon stopped renewing 2 subscription services he had not used in months. Naomi started bringing lunch to work 3 days a week instead of 5. Small changes. Changes that did not require willpower because they were almost invisible to their day-to-day lives. After 14 months of consistency at this modest pace, both of them passed $5,000. They were not done. They were halfway. And here is the part that almost nobody mentions. The second $5,000 was significantly easier than the first. Once the habit was running on autopilot, increasing the transfer felt natural. By month 16, Damon was transferring $200 per paycheck. By month 19, Naomi was transferring $290. The acceleration compounded. They both crossed $10,000 somewhere in their 22nd month. Here is a cost almost nobody calculates. Every day, the person without a savings buffer makes somewhere between 50 and 100 small financial decisions, each one of which carries the weight of survival math. Generic versus name brand, coffee at home versus coffee out, pack a lunch versus buy a lunch, drive versus rideshare. Each one of those decisions in isolation is small. In aggregate, they consume a measurable amount of mental energy across the day. Psychologists call this decision fatigue, and they have shown it depletes the same cognitive resources you use for everything else: work performance, creative thinking, emotional regulation, relationship maintenance. The person grinding through 80 survival math decisions a day is, by evening, depleted in ways that affect every other part of their life. The person with $10,000 in savings still makes choices, but the choices are based on preference, not survival. The choice is no longer, can I afford the name brand pasta? It is, do I prefer the name brand pasta? That single change in the mental framing of every grocery decision frees up an enormous amount of cognitive bandwidth across the course of a year. Naomi later said the moment she realized she had crossed into this territory was on a Saturday afternoon at her usual grocery store. She was standing in front of the pasta selection, and she suddenly realized, for the first time in her adult life, she was choosing based on what she actually wanted to eat, not what she could afford. She did not buy anything fancy. She bought the same brand she would have bought before, but the decision had a different feeling. She walked out of the grocery store crying in her car for about 90 seconds, then drove home. That is what the buffer actually buys you. Here is the counterintuitive thing about having $10,000 in the bank. Once the buffer exists, individual dollars feel less precious. And that small reduction in dollar preciousness makes you significantly more willing to invest in opportunities that could increase your income. This sounds backwards. It is not. Here is how it plays out. 2 months after Damon crossed $10,000 in savings, his industry held a professional networking event in town. The cost of attending was $50. Pre-buffer Damon would have skipped. $50 was the same as half a week's grocery budget. Declining was automatic. Post-buffer Damon attended. He met a senior designer at another firm who was hiring. 3 months later, Damon had a new job that paid $11,000 more per year. The $50 event returned $11,000 per year. Annualized. It is one of the highest return decisions of his life. The same pattern shows up across every category of investment in yourself: the certification course, the professional conference, the networking trip, the new laptop, the mentor coaching session, the freelance project at a discount that becomes a long-term client. Each one of these is a small dollar amount that the pre-buffer version of you cannot psychologically afford. The post-buffer version of you sees them as obvious investments. The buffer is not just self-protection. The buffer is the entry ticket to the upward financial mobility that nobody can access from a position of constant survival. Somewhere in the 8th month of Naomi's saving journey, on a Saturday afternoon in Atlanta, she sat down on a park bench in Piedmont Park to eat a sandwich she had brought from home. The man on the other end of the bench was a stick man in a small black bowler hat with a folded newspaper open on his lap. Naomi did not notice him, because Naomi did not notice him. He looked up briefly when she sat down, tipped his bowler hat by way of greeting, and returned to his paper. He has been on a lot of park benches over a lot of saving journeys. He has watched a lot of people decide, quietly, to become different versions of themselves. He has tipped his bowler hat a lot. He never says anything. The witness simply witnesses. The work of becoming someone who saves is, in the end, work that nobody does for you. But you are not as alone as it sometimes feels. There's always a stickman on a bench nearby, quietly rooting for the version of you that is about to arrive. So here is what the $10,000 milestone actually buys. It does not buy you a nicer car. It does not buy you a vacation. It does not buy you a luxury that anyone watching this can see. What it buys you is a version of yourself that almost nobody who has not been through the journey can imagine. It buys you the version of yourself who sleeps through a Tuesday night without the 3 a.m. ceiling stare. It buys you the version of yourself who walks into a job interview without the body language of desperation. It buys you the version of yourself who can say no to a bad deal because you are not financially dependent on the yes. It buys you the version of yourself who has the cognitive bandwidth at the end of a workday to actually be present with the people you love. It buys you the version of yourself who notices the opportunity in the networking event flyer. It buys you the version of yourself who chooses the pasta based on what you want to eat. This is what people do not understand about money. Money is not the goal. Money is the byproduct. The goal is the identity. The goal is the version of yourself that becomes possible once the survival math has stopped consuming most of your daily mental energy. $10,000 buys you that. The amount itself is, in many ways, irrelevant. The transformation it triggers is the entire point. Naomi and Damon both crossed the threshold 22 months after they started. They are not rich. They are not done. They are at the very beginning of a much longer financial journey. But the version of them that arrived at $10,000 is not the version of them that started. That is the actual deal. You are not really saving money. You are building a different person. The money is just the receipt. The numbers, the cortisol research, the decision fatigue science, and the math of saving the first $10,000 improves your decisions. Subscribe for one new money story every week. The systems nobody explains, explained. We will see you in the next one.